Well, first of all, the civilization of Kemet goes back over 10,000 years, and even further than that, especially if we deal with Tasseti of over 26,000 years ago. So not only do we have that great history, we have the monuments, we have the temples of thousands of years of our ancestors, empirical or observation of the earth and the heavens, and bringing together powerful spiritual knowledge that took them countless thousands of years, not only to document in stone, but even on papyrus. So this was the center of the world, where everyone wanted to come and had to come to learn and study for not 4 years, but 40 years to become a Karihab, a high priest, for one to become a Ka, to rise up one spirit that, of course, had been corrupted. So this is why the Europeans had to come into Kemet, and not only come into Kemet as the early Greeks like like Thales and Pythagoras and many others after them. But after the Greeks, then you see the Greek invaders like Alexander the Barbarian that our children are still taught to call the Great. So we're taught to call their heroes the Great. So how can you call someone great who's coming in to conquer? So this was the center of the world right here with the evidence and the proof and the facts. Now, why did they corrupt? Why did they take the story? Because the Europeans were barbarians. They had no story. They had no story of a spiritual life. African people always have been and still are a very spiritual people. It's unfortunate, though, that spirituality is not used for us today. It's used against us. It's used against us, as I said before, because we've been taught to deify Europeans. It's through that conquest with Europeans brought in the whole the conqueror's deity or the conqueror's God into the psychic of black people. As we cut off with Theodosius, and we were talking about why did I call them gangster popes, is even when we swing to West Africa and deal with when Diogo Diaz and Boer came down the west coast of Africa, okay, they started to kidnap Africans. And when the first Europeans came down the west coast of Africa, Mauritania, okay, it was the Catholic Church that was involved from the very beginning, Pope Martin VI, okay, who they took and sold some Africans too. That started the African Ma'afa, the kidnapping of African people. So the gangster popes were at the very beginning of not only the conquest into Kemet, but also we swing to the western side of Africa, but also on the west side of Africa with the Ma'afa kidnapping of African people. So we see that these things have continued. But it's the various conferences that you have mentioned that they have instituted these things, and they've instituted them in the name of God. And it's through this various cataclysms and their religion, okay, and people are told these things over and over again, and that's what brings a belief system. As we mentioned the Conference of Nicene in 325 A.D., where they created this whole Serapis Jesus, who was given a divine spirit. And
now I want you to stop for 1 second, because now you said something, okay, and I need to have an understanding. You said at the Council of Nicaea in 325 A.D., that Constantine called a conference. And they created, you said, Serapis Jesus. What is a Serapis Jesus? What does that mean? Okay, well, first of all, we're talking about a creation that has nothing to do with any divinity whatsoever, no divine representation. We're talking about through the conquest of this emperor, Constantine, who came in as a plunder, as a conqueror into Kemet, taking from what the Ptolemies already had was a creation of this character named Serapis. Now, who were the Ptolemies? Okay, the Ptolemies were the generals of Alexander II. When Alexander died, his kingdom or his empire was spread among his generals. Now, Alexander the Greek, you talking about the Greek? Alexander, what did I say? The Greek, no. I just want making sure because so you talking about he was from Greece. Sure that I didn't go back into no, you didn't. You didn't. Call him the Great. No, you didn't. You didn't. So you say Alexander from Greece? Alexander the Barbarian or Alexander the Greek. Okay. But when he died, his empire was spread among his generals, and Ptolemy I is the one that got Egypt. Okay. But our ancestors refused to acknowledge them, okay, on the throne as the king of the throne. They saw them as usurpers on the throne. So what they did was trick the people in creating a combination of Osiris or Asar, that our ancestors, and the Apis Bull, and creating this Serapis-like character to represent the divinity for there to be justified to rule the throne of Kemet. So now, for a person that's never seen what Serapis look like, what does Serapis look like? Serapis is a white European that has a beard that looks just like the representation that we see, that many black folks see as Jesus. So am I to understand that the first concept or picture or likeness of a white savior is coming from, that we now call Jesus Christ, with the white one, comes from this figure you call Serapis.
Comes from that figure called Serapis.
How do you spell Serapis?
When you look at the origin of that name Serapis, we're looking at a S-E-R-A-P-I-S. So it's a combination of a sar and the epis bull. So we see A-P-I-S, epis bull. So that's a combination of two names that was put together to make this Serapis character. Now, Asar, we talked about, as I said, he was the first in the creation story of Kemet. They were the first divine kingship with his wife, who were created in a balance.
Now, how does Asar look? If someone to look at
Asar is jet black. Jet black.
So the original African god was jet black.
Jet black.
And then the Europeans came in and invaded, and our ancestors didn't want to say that they were God, but tricked them and gave them a thing called Serapis so that they could say that they were gods.
So they can say that they were God, and through the worship of this Serapis. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about these are centuries going by here as these changes took place. This didn't take place overnight.
Okay.
Okay, so when we see this is during a Ptolemy period, that's one period because the Ptolemies were on the throne of Kemet for about 300 years. And then we see a time of the Romans when the Romans came in under Augustus Caesar. So it's Augustus Caesar who closed down many of the temples of Kemet and first started the copying of many of the spiritual ideas. And then, of course, that thrust was full forward during the time of Theodosius and Justinian.
Now I have a question. Now, if the whites are coming in and doing all of this, it almost sounds like nobody was fighting back. Were there anybody during that time who was fighting this happening?
Yes, there were those who were fighting. They had an underground guerrilla warfare. They had an underground spiritual movement. Okay, and these Africans were called the Gnostics.
Okay.
The Gnostics, they in fact called themselves the knowers of the truth because they knew the real truth.
Now spell Gnostics for us, for people that want to look it up on the internet. How do you spell Gnostics?
Okay, that's Gnostics. That's G-N-O-S-T-I-C, Gnostic.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying agnostic.
Okay.
Okay, because that's what they put in, to say, well, someone is agnostic, okay, that means that you're not a believer. But that's what they threw on the Gnostics. The Gnostics saw themselves as the knowers of this truth. So that's what started the persecution of those first North African Christians who were called Gnostics.
Now, was there any people with, like, individuals who stood out fighting against this? There were Africans fighting against this new white images coming in to take over the spiritual tradition. Were there any popular people, like, right today we had Khalid Abdul Muhammad or Astro Kwesi, Master Teacher? Were there any names that we can look at people who fought the Romans and the Greeks trying to come in and change our spiritual traditions?
Well, there were a number of people who were, but some of the names have not come down to us. We know some of our best fighters and liberators for us are generally unknown to us. Now, some would say that, the man may have, you got an African Hebrew who was part of this African Gnostic system under the Essenes, a man named Yeshua, corrupted into a Jesus character. Now, this person was not born of the Immaculate Conception, did not raise from the dead, but what the Gnostics did or the Essenes did, they deified this man.
Now, we're going to stop right here.